The photograph sits in a gilded frame inside Holyroodhouse, and it looks perfectly innocent. Camilla, Queen Consort, is seated in one of the palace's official reception rooms during Royal Week in Scotland. Across from her, J.K. Rowling leans forward with the practiced ease of a woman who has been invited, not summoned. The light falls the way palace light always does, managed and warm, softened by curtains that have been arranged the same way for decades. The kind of light that makes everyone in the frame look like they belong there. A routine image, a standard Royal Week engagement between a Queen Consort and one of Britain's most prominent cultural figures, two women in a room, a table between them, a palace photographer doing what palace photographers do, except it was released on the 2nd of July, the very last day of Pride Month, and by the time the British public saw that photograph, it had already stopped being a picture of two women in a room. It had become evidence. Not evidence of wrongdoing, not evidence of a secret plot or a private conspiracy, but evidence of something the monarchy cannot afford and has spent centuries learning to avoid. It had become evidence of judgment. Let me tell you what happened inside the palace walls after that photograph landed on the public's desk. Because the public saw the backlash and the tabloid headlines, but the public did not see the meeting that followed, or the printed page that changed hands across a polished table, or the long and terrible silence in a briefing room where a Queen Consort discovered that the man she married would not overrule the man who will one day be king. To understand why one photograph could trigger a constitutional mechanism that most people do not even know exists, you need to understand what royal rooms actually are. They are not buildings, they are not backdrops for official engagements, they are not decor. Royal rooms are the physical expression of crown neutrality. Every stone, every painting, every chair arranged beside a window bearing the royal cipher carries a weight that no private venue can replicate. When a meeting takes place inside an official palace room, the room itself confers a kind of endorsement. That endorsement is not personal. It does not belong to the person sitting in the chair. It does not follow them home when the engagement ends. It belongs to the crown, and the crown lends it through a system of image approvals designed to ensure that no single household, no single royal member, no single meeting in a single room on a single afternoon can make the monarchy appear to take sides in a public debate it has no constitutional business entering. The approval system is not complicated. Before any photograph taken inside an official room is released to the media, it must pass through the protocol clearance process. A signature is required on the approval log. The signature confirms that the image, its timing, its framing, and its broader context have been reviewed for neutrality risk. Every royal household understands this process. Every household follows it. Every household except one. Camilla's private secretary authorized the release of the Holyrood photograph as a standard Royal Week record. In the view of Camilla's household, the meeting was on the official schedule, printed and circulated days in advance. The room was booked through proper channels, confirmed by the Holyroodhouse estate office. The photographer was a palace employee operating under standing instructions to document every engagement. No additional clearance was sought because, in their reading of the rules, no additional clearance was required. It was a Tuesday. It was routine. And routines, in the long and comfortable experience of Camilla's office, do not require anyone's permission. But here is what Camilla's office did not consider, or perhaps considered and dismissed, or perhaps never had the institutional instinct to weigh. The problem was not the meeting. Camilla was well within her rights to meet J.K. Rowling. A Queen Consort meets hundreds of cultural figures during any given royal season. The problem was not the photograph itself. Palace photographers document every official engagement, and the images enter an archive that stretches back further than living memory. The problem was the release, the timing, and the room. Because Rowling's public positions on gender identity have made her one of the most polarizing figures in British cultural and political life, her views have drawn fierce support from those who share them and fierce opposition from those who do not, in measures so nearly equal that any institution standing near her will inevitably be pulled toward one side or the other. And when a Queen Consort sits with that particular figure in an official palace room, and the resulting image is released to the press on the last day of the month dedicated to the community most directly affected by Rowling's public statements, the photograph does not land as a routine record. It lands as a signal. Whether Camilla intended that signal is entirely irrelevant. The room sent it on her behalf, and the room did not have permission to send it. William's communications office saw the photograph within hours of its public release. The reaction in that office was not anger. It was something colder, quieter, and far more procedural than anger. It was recognition. William's senior communications secretary, a woman who has spent more than a decade managing the gap between what the palace does and what the public perceives, looked at the image and knew immediately what had happened. She did not need to check the protocol log to know it would be empty. She checked it anyway. The signature line for the Holyrood photograph was blank. No one in Camilla's household had sought clearance. No one had flagged the timing. No one had considered that an official room changes the meaning of every meeting that takes place inside it, the way a frame changes the meaning of every picture placed within it. The empty signature line was not a scandal. Scandals burn fast and leave ash. This was something more durable. It was a habit exposed, and this was the day the habit finally found its consequence. William's communications secretary sent a formal query to Camilla's household. The query was measured, professional, and devastating in the way that only professional documents can be. It asked for the protocol documentation supporting the photograph's release. It asked for the name of the reviewing officer. It asked for the date and time of clearance approval. Every question pointed to a document that did not exist, and every question was phrased as though the document surely must exist, because why would any royal household release an official room image without one? Camilla's private secretary responded within the day. The response was confident, carefully drafted, and fundamentally mistaken about what was being asked. It stated that the image had been released under the household's standard Royal Week media authority. It cited precedent from previous Royal Weeks. It referenced the booking records for the room, the photographer's standing assignment, the official nature of the engagement. It made a detailed and well-sourced case that protocol clearance was required only for images involving state ceremonies, diplomatic receptions, or events carrying national security sensitivities, not for meetings with private citizens, however prominent. The memo arrived at Anne's protocol office the following morning. Anne, the Princess Royal, has kept this particular corner of the institution running with the organizational precision of someone who believes that procedure is not bureaucracy but architecture. Her team read Camilla's memo with the patience of people who keep very detailed and very well-organized records. They did not argue with the memo's reasoning. They did not draft a rebuttal. They simply produced their own document, and their document was better. It was the protocol approval log for the previous 12 months of Royal Room image releases. Every household, every image, every room, every release. The Duke of Edinburgh's household had sought clearance for every photograph. The Princess Royal's office, naturally, had sought clearance for everything. The Wales household, William and Catherine's operation, had sought and received clearance for every single image released from any official room. The log was comprehensive, consistent, and merciless in what it revealed. Camilla's household had not sought clearance once. Not for the Holyrood photograph, not for any photograph, not for any image released from any official room in the entire 12-month period. The approval log did not prove malice or deliberate defiance. It proved something that the institution treats as more dangerous than either. It proved a pattern of operating as though the rules were optional, a settled habit of treating royal rooms as personal property rather than institutional assets, and the Holyrood photograph was simply the first time the habit produced a consequence visible enough to force a response the institution could no longer postpone. Here is where the story changes direction entirely, because until this point, it looks like a staff-level dispute about media procedures and paperwork, a process failure, a gap in the filing system, fixable with a memo, a meeting, a quiet correction over coffee. That is what Camilla's household expected. That is what they were preparing for. But then William went to see his father. The meeting was private. No staff present, no equerry waiting outside the door, no notes taken, no minutes circulated, no official record of any kind. William walked into his father's study at Clarence House on a Wednesday morning, and the two men spoke for less than 30 minutes. What they said in those 30 minutes changed the structure of the entire crisis. William did not ask Charles to punish Camilla. He did not demand a formal investigation or a public statement. He did not raise his voice or present an ultimatum. He asked one question, and the question was simple enough to fit in a single sentence and devastating enough to fill an entire room with its implications. Did you know the photograph would be released without protocol clearance? Charles said he did not know. He said it calmly, without defensiveness, the way a man speaks when he has already rehearsed the worst version of the conversation and arrived at something close to resignation. And then he said something else, one additional sentence, and that sentence changed the architecture of everything that would follow. He said that Camilla's judgment had created the situation, not her staff's judgment, not her private secretary's administrative failure, not a gap in the household's understanding of protocol requirements. Camilla's judgment, personal, specific, undelegated. The word landed between father and son like a document. Neither of them had wanted to sign, but both of them understood the moment it appeared. Charles had just told his heir, plainly and without qualification, that the Queen Consort's office had failed because the Queen Consort herself had failed. Her judgment, her decision not to question what her team was doing with images from official rooms, her comfort with a way of operating that treated crown neutrality as someone else's concern, that admission did not stay in the room where it was spoken. It traveled through the institution the way all royal admissions travel, not as gossip, but as gravity, a silent shift in the weight of things that everyone feels and no one openly acknowledges. It transferred the crisis from a process question that could be fixed with new paperwork to a personnel question that could only be answered with a structural change, and it gave William something more powerful than mere permission to act. It gave him his father's private concession that the problem was the person, not the procedure, and that the solution would need to address the person even if the language used to deliver it spoke only of procedure. Now, I want to pause here because fairness requires it, and this story deserves the strongest version of Camilla's position before it moves past it. There is a version of this narrative where Camilla is right. Royal Week photographs have always been released with minimal ceremony and even less scrutiny. The meeting with Rowling was legitimate, voluntarily scheduled by the palace, and attended by a private citizen who broke no law and violated no protocol by walking through the front door. The room was properly booked, the photographer was properly assigned, and the timing, the last day of Pride Month, may have been nothing more than coincidence. Not every decision made on the 30th of June is a calculated statement about the month that is ending. Sometimes a Tuesday is just a Tuesday. That version is reasonable. It may even be technically accurate. But the Crown does not operate on technical accuracy. It operates on perception because perception is the only currency a constitutional monarchy possesses. The monarchy does not make laws, does not set policy, does not govern. It exists on the understanding that it belongs to everyone and endorses no one, and the moment the public perceives otherwise, the currency begins to devalue. The perception created by the Holyrood photograph was clear, immediate, and resistant to correction. It looked like an endorsement, and an endorsement is precisely what the Crown's neutrality system exists to prevent, regardless of whether the endorsement was intended or accidental or simply the product of a household that did not think the rules applied to an ordinary Tuesday. What happened next took place in a briefing room that Camilla entered fully expecting to leave as the prevailing party. Her private secretary had requested a formal meeting to argue that the Holyrood photograph should be re-released through official channels as a demonstration that the Crown stood firmly behind its entire Royal Week program. The logic was bold, almost confrontational. If the institution supported its own engagements, then it must support every record of those engagements. Suppressing or quietly shelving the photograph would amount to an admission that the meeting itself was inappropriate, and the meeting was not inappropriate. Camilla's household wanted to force the palace into a binary choice: endorse the photograph openly or condemn the engagement that produced it. They were confident the institution would never condemn a meeting it had scheduled and approved. William agreed to attend the briefing. He did not tell Camilla's office why he agreed so readily. The briefing took place on a Thursday afternoon in a ground floor meeting room with high ceilings and a long mahogany table that has hosted hundreds of conversations the public will never hear about. Camilla arrived with her private secretary and one communications aide. William arrived with his senior communications secretary. Charles was present but said nothing from the moment he sat down, positioned at the far end of the table, equidistant from his wife and his son, a geometry of non-commitment. Camilla's private secretary presented the case for re-release with the precision of someone who had rehearsed every sentence. The meeting was official. The room was authorized. The photograph was a factual record. The release followed established procedures. The argument was logical, sequential, meticulously sourced, and entirely focused on process. It answered the question that Camilla's household wanted the institution to ask. It did not address the question the institution was actually asking. William let the presentation finish. He nodded in the places where nodding was expected. He made no objections. He asked no questions. And then, when the silence after the final sentence had lasted exactly long enough for Camilla's private secretary to believe that the argument had landed, William reached into a folder he had brought with him and produced a single printed page. It was the protocol approval log. One entry for the Holyroodhouse photograph. One signature line, conspicuously, undeniably, permanently empty. He placed it on the table, centered between Camilla and her private secretary, the way a solicitor might place a contract that requires a signature neither party wants to give. Camilla looked at the page. She reached for the photograph on the screen behind her secretary, the image she had come to defend, the image she believed the institution owed her the dignity of supporting. William did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He spoke in the measured, quiet register of a man who has prepared not an argument, but a decision. He announced the freeze. Effective immediately, all Royal Room image approvals originating from Camilla's household were suspended. Future clearance authority for any photograph taken in an official room during any of Camilla's engagements would be transferred to his communications office. The suspension was not temporary. It was not a probationary period. It was not a review pending further discussion. It was a permanent restructuring of the approval chain. And it meant that every image Camilla's team wanted to release from any official room in any palace, from Buckingham to Balmoral, from Windsor to Holyroodhouse, would first require William's personal signature before it could reach the media desk. Camilla, who had entered the room with the composed expression of a woman who expected to leave it with her authority not merely intact but reinforced, turned to Charles. It was the instinctive turn of a wife toward a husband, the unspoken appeal that says you will not let this stand. Charles was already looking at the floor. He had known what William was going to say. He had perhaps known since their private meeting at Clarence House. He had not warned Camilla. He had not intervened. He had not attempted the quiet compromise of suggesting a gentler alternative in a private moment before the briefing. He had looked at the protocol log, heard his own admission about Camilla's judgment echoing back to him through his son's administrative action, and chosen the institution over his wife's comfort. The silence in that briefing room was not empty. It was crowded with everything that had just changed, everything that could not be taken back, and everything that would follow. A queen consort who had operated for years with near-total independence over her public image had been placed under the direct supervision of the man who would inherit the crown she holds by marriage alone. The man she married had watched it happen while studying the grain of the mahogany table, and the photograph that started everything was still on file, neither retracted nor condemned nor apologized for, simply frozen in institutional amber as the last image Camilla's office would ever release without first asking permission from a man she did not expect to answer to. The price was specific, administrative, and irreversible. Camilla's household lost its independent authority over Royal Room images, not temporarily, not under review, permanently. Every photograph taken in an official room during her engagements now carries a second signature requirement. Her private secretary drafts the release. William's communications office approves or denies it. The practical consequence is supervision. Her team, which operated for years with the quiet confidence of people who believed their own judgment was entirely sufficient, now submits every image to the same clearance process that every other household has been following all along. They join the queue, they wait their turn, they accept the result. But the symbolic consequence cuts deeper than any procedural change. The freeze does not say Camilla was wrong about the Holyrood photograph. It says something far more damaging. It says she cannot be trusted to know when she is wrong. That distinction, the gap between making a single mistake and being judged structurally incapable of recognizing your own mistakes, is the price that will follow her through every official room, every engagement, every photograph for the rest of her time as queen consort. And yet, from the outside, nothing visible has changed. Camilla still attends engagements. She still sits in official rooms beside windows bearing the royal cipher. She still smiles for the palace photographer with the practiced warmth of a woman who has learned, over many difficult years, how to occupy a chair that was not originally meant for her. The public sees the same queen, consort, performing the same duties in the same elegant settings. What the public cannot see is the additional step in the chain, the signature requirement that did not exist before, the waiting period between image capture and image release that has stretched from minutes to days. The most severe royal consequences are always the ones the public never sees, and the subject can never escape because there is no visible wound to display, no demotion to explain to the press, no headline announcing what was lost. There is only the quiet, permanent, daily knowledge that someone else now controls the tool you once used without a second thought. Some people will call this an overreaction, a single photograph, a timing dispute, a process gap that could have been closed with a memo and a firm conversation. And perhaps they are right that the photograph alone did not warrant this response. But the photograph was not alone. It arrived at the end of a 12-month trail of empty signature lines, a year of operating outside the system that every other household treated as foundational. Memos do not create precedents. Firm conversations do not restructure approval chains. And the crown, which has survived for centuries not by being right, but by being relentlessly, institutionally, sometimes ruthlessly careful, does not treat neutrality breaches as administrative errors to be corrected over biscuits. It treats them as boundary tests, and it answers boundary tests with boundaries. The freeze is not a punishment. It is a wall built where a gap used to be, and walls do not care whether the person who caused their construction agrees that they are necessary. Months from now, when Camilla sits for a photograph in a stateroom at Buckingham Palace, she will wait for clearance she once did not need. The photographer will take the image the way photographers always have, adjusting the light, checking the angle, capturing the moment. Her private secretary will draft the release language, noting the date, the occasion, the attendees, the room, and then that draft will travel from Camilla's desk to William's communications office, where it will sit in the queue alongside every other image request from every other household, the same queue she never joined, the same process she never followed, the same signature line she left empty for 12 months running. The room will look the same, the light will fall the way palace light always does, managed and warm and designed to make everyone in the frame look as though they belong. The chair will be in the same position it occupied when the Holyrood photograph was taken. The curtains will hang the same way. Nothing the camera can see will have changed. But the room will remember what happened here because royal rooms have longer memories than the people who sit in them. The room that was once Camilla's stage, her platform, her unchallenged domain, is now her supervised workspace. And the supervision is not a season that will pass. It is not a cooling off period with a quiet end date. It is a settlement. It is the institution's way of saying to a queen consort what it has said, quietly and without exception, to everyone who has ever mistaken access for ownership. You may sit in the room. You may smile for the camera. You may meet whoever the schedule places in front of you, but the room does not belong to you. And if you use it without permission, We will remind you whose signature goes on the door. A queen consort who borrows a room must return it in the condition she found it. Camilla borrowed Holyroodhouse for one photograph and returned it with a crack in the crown's neutrality that William is still repairing. One approval form at a time. The crack is not visible to the public. The repair work is not visible to the press. But inside the institution, every household knows what happened in that briefing room on that Thursday afternoon, and every private secretary in every royal office now checks the approval log twice before sending an image to the media desk. Not because a memo instructed them to, because a room showed them what happens when you forget. If you have ever watched a room change owners in a single afternoon, you understand why this story matters more than any headline could convey. If you believe the crown's neutrality is worth more than any photograph, more than any single meeting, more than any one person's comfort or convenience, then you already know the verdict this story delivers. Subscribe to Royal Verdict and stay for the consequences the palace would prefer you never learn about. Share this with someone who needs to understand that royal rooms are not backdrops and not decorations, they are boundaries. And boundaries, unlike the people who test them, do not forget. The room is still there. It is